In the small, peaceful town of Silver Ridge, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. Nestled between lush green hills and surrounded by dense forests, it was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, and community gatherings felt like family reunions. People chose to live here for its serene environment, fresh air, and the promise of a quiet lifestyle away from the chaos of big cities. The Homeowners Association, HOA, played a crucial role in keeping things running smoothly. They were responsible for maintaining shared spaces, ensuring property values stayed high, and making sure any new projects followed strict rules designed to protect the town's charm. For years, everything had gone according to plan. New houses were built with care, parks were well maintained, and even the smallest changes required approval from both the HOA and local authorities. But all of that changed one sunny spring morning when whispers began spreading through the community about something unusual happening on the edge of town. At first, no one paid much attention. After all, construction wasn't uncommon. It could have been anything from road repairs to someone building a new home. But as weeks turned into months, curiosity grew into concern. On weekends, families driving past the outskirts noticed massive bulldozers tearing up large sections of land. Trucks carrying concrete, steel beams, and other materials rumbled down. Narrow roads usually reserved for bicycles and pedestrians. Dust clouds rose into the sky, obscuring once clear views of the forest canopy. It became impossible to ignore. Something big was being built. Yet, despite the obvious signs of activity, there were no announcements from the HOA or local officials. No permits posted on site, no public meetings held to explain what was going on. Just silence, and more trucks. Rumors started flying almost immediately. Some speculated it was a new housing development. Others thought it might be an industrial project. A few optimists hoped it was a public park or recreational area funded by the government. But none of these guesses prepared anyone for the truth. When the structure finally took shape, jaws dropped across Silver Ridge. Rising from the ground was a sprawling luxury resort worth $10 million. There were gleaming cabins with panoramic windows, a manicured golf course stretching as far as the eye could see, sparkling swimming pools, and even a spa offering treatments imported from Europe. It looked like paradise, but it also raised serious questions. Emma Carter, a retired attorney who lived in the heart of Silver Ridge, was among the first to realize something was terribly wrong. Known for her sharp mind and relentless pursuit of fairness, Emma had always been active in the community. She served on various committees, attended HOA meetings religiously, and kept tabs on anything that affected her neighbors. So when she heard about the mysterious resort, she decided to investigate further. What she discovered shocked her to her core. The land where the resort now stood had been protected under the neighborhood's covenants, a set of legally binding agreements signed by every homeowner when they purchased their properties. These covenants clearly stated that the area was designated as green space, meant to preserve the natural beauty of Silver Ridge and provide residents with a peaceful escape from urban life. Building anything commercial or industrial on this land required unanimous approval from the HOA and extensive permitting from local authorities. Yet somehow the entire process had been bypassed. Determined to get answers, Emma began digging deeper. She requested copies of recent HOA meeting minutes, reviewed zoning laws, and scoured public records for any trace of paperwork related to the resort. What she found, or rather didn't find, was alarming. There were no permits filed, no environmental impact assessments conducted, and no official approvals granted. In short, the resort was completely illegal. Worse still, it seemed the HOA itself was behind the project. Secret meetings, undisclosed contracts, and suspicious financial transactions hinted at a conspiracy involving some of the most trusted members of the community. As Emma pieced together the puzzle, her initial shock gave way to anger. How could the very people tasked with protecting Silver Ridge allow such a blatant violation of the rules? And why had they done it without consulting the residents whose lives would be directly impacted? The more she learned, the clearer it became. This wasn't just negligence. It was betrayal. But Emma wasn't the type to sit back and let injustice slide. Having spent decades fighting for fairness in courtrooms, she knew how to take action. First, she reached out to her closest friends and neighbors, sharing her findings and urging them to join her cause. Together, they formed a grassroots movement aimed at holding the HOA accountable. Flyers appeared on doorsteps, social media, groups buzzed with updates, and soon, nearly everyone in Silver Ridge was talking about the unauthorized resort. Still, challenging the HOA wouldn't be easy. The organization wielded significant power, not only over the community, but also within local politics. Board members had connections with influential figures, including city council members and business leaders. Many feared retaliation if they spoke out too loudly. Even so, Emma refused to back down. Armed with evidence and fueled by determination, she vowed to fight until justice was served, for herself, for her neighbors, and for the future of Silver Ridge. Little did she know this decision would set off a chain of events that would test her resolve, divide the community, and ultimately reshape the town forever. Emma Carter's investigation into the illegal resort had revealed a web of corruption and deceit that shocked even her. Armed with documents, emails, and testimonies from disgruntled contractors, she knew she couldn't let this slide. But taking on the HOA was no small feat. These weren't just neighbors. They were powerful figures in Silver Ridge, people who commanded respect and sometimes fear within the community. Emma understood that challenging them would require more than evidence. It would take courage, strategy, and unity among residents. Her first step was to call a special meeting of the Homeowners Association. Under the HOA's bylaws, any member could request such a gathering if enough signatures were collected. Emma spent days knocking on doors, explaining her findings to skeptical neighbors and urging them to attend. Not everyone was eager to get involved. Some worried about rocking the boat, while others simply didn't believe the situation was as dire as Emma claimed. "It's just a resort," one neighbor shrugged. "Maybe it'll bring jobs and tourism." Despite the resistance, Emma managed to gather enough support to force the meeting. On the appointed evening, the community center buzzed with tension. Normally, these gatherings were mundane affairs, discussions about landscaping budgets or parking rules, but tonight the air crackled with anticipation. Residents packed the room, filling every seat and spilling into the aisles. Whispers rippled through the crowd as Emma stood at the front, clutching a thick folder stuffed with papers. When she began speaking, her voice was steady but firm. She started by laying out the facts: the lack of permits, the violation of covenants, the misuse of reserve funds meant for community improvements. One by one, she displayed copies of incriminating documents on a projector screen, a trail of financial transactions showing how HOA money had been funneled into the resort project, emails revealing secret negotiations with private investors, and sketches of the construction plans dated months before any official approval should have been granted. The room erupted in murmurs. Some gasped audibly, others exchanged incredulous looks. A few shouted questions at Emma, demanding clarification, or accusing her of exaggerating. But as she continued presenting her case, the mood shifted. Anger bubbled to the surface. People felt betrayed, not just by the HOA but by their own neighbors who had allowed this to happen behind closed doors. Still, not everyone was convinced. Several attendees defended the board members, arguing that the resort might actually benefit the town. "Think about it," one man said, standing up to address the crowd. "Tourists will come here now. Restaurants will make more money. Maybe property values will go up." His words sparked a heated debate. Some agreed, saying the resort could be an opportunity for growth. Others countered that short-term gains weren't worth sacrificing the integrity of the community or risking legal consequences. Amid the chaos, Emma remained calm. She acknowledged the potential benefits but reminded everyone that none of those arguments excused breaking the law. "This isn't about whether we like the resort or not," she said. "It's about accountability. The HOA broke its own rules, the rules we all agreed to when we bought our homes here. If we don't hold them responsible, what message does that send? That they can do whatever they want without consequences." Her words struck a chord with many in the audience. By the end of the meeting, there was a palpable sense of resolve. While opinions still varied, most residents agreed on one thing: something needed to be done. Encouraged by the turnout and the growing momentum, Emma decided to escalate the fight. She hired a team of experienced attorneys specializing in real estate law and filed a lawsuit against the HOA on behalf of herself and other concerned residents. Their demands were clear: shut down the resort, restore the land to its original state, and ensure proper oversight moving forward. The legal battle that followed was anything but smooth. From the moment the lawsuit was announced, the HOA launched a counteroffensive. Board members denied wrongdoing, claiming the construction had been approved through informal agreements and verbal contracts. They dismissed Emma's accusations as baseless attempts to stir up trouble. To make matters worse, they hired a high-profile law firm known for its aggressive tactics. Intimidation became a key part of their strategy. Anonymous letters began appearing in mailboxes around Silver Ridge. Some warned residents that siding with Emma would lead to retaliation, higher fees, restricted access to amenities, even threats of eviction for renters. Others tried to discredit Emma personally, spreading rumors that she had ulterior motives or was seeking revenge against specific board members. At first, these attacks rattled some supporters, causing cracks in the coalition Emma had worked so hard to build. But instead of backing down, Emma doubled down. She organized informational sessions to educate residents about their rights and explain the legal process. She invited local journalists to cover the story, ensuring transparency and keeping public pressure on the HOA. Slowly but surely, her efforts paid off. More people rallied around her cause, outraged by the board's bullying tactics. Even those initially hesitant to join the fight began speaking out, realizing that staying silent only empowered the perpetrators. Behind the scenes, Emma's legal team worked tirelessly to gather evidence. They subpoenaed bank records, interviewed former employees of the resort's construction company, and pored over years' worth of HOA meeting minutes. Every new discovery strengthened their case. One particularly damning piece of information came from a whistleblower, a contractor, who had grown disillusioned with the project after witnessing blatant safety violations during construction. He provided detailed accounts of shortcuts taken to cut costs, including using substandard materials and ignoring building codes. This revelation not only highlighted the dangers posed by the resort, but also exposed the HOA's reckless disregard for the well-being of the community. As the weeks turned into months, the lawsuit dominated life in Silver Ridge. Conversations at grocery stores, coffee shops, and school pickup lines revolved around the latest developments. Families divided over whose side to take. Friendships strained under the weight of differing opinions. Yet, amidst the turmoil, a glimmer of hope emerged. For the first time in years, residents were actively engaged in shaping the future of their town. Whether they supported Emma or opposed her, everyone was talking, and that in itself was progress. Despite the mounting challenges, Emma refused to give up. Late nights spent reviewing legal briefs, early mornings preparing for court appearances, and countless hours reassuring nervous neighbors took a toll on her physically and emotionally. Her friends noticed the change. Gone was the lively woman, who once hosted lively dinner parties and volunteered at the library. In her place was someone quieter, more focused, driven by a singular purpose: justice. But even Emma had moments of doubt. There were days when the enormity of the task ahead seemed insurmountable. How could one person stand against an organization with decades of influence and resources? What if she failed, not just herself but the entire community? On those nights, she found solace in nature, walking along the forest trails where she often went to clear her mind. It was during one such walk that inspiration struck. Why not propose a compromise? Shutting down the resort entirely might not be feasible, given its size and the investments already made. But what if the HOA agreed to transfer control of the property to the community? Instead of profiting privately, the resort could operate as a cooperative venture, with proceeds reinvested into Silver Ridge. The idea was bold and risky, but it offered a way forward that balanced accountability with practicality. With renewed determination, Emma approached her lawyers with the proposal. After refining the details, They presented it during settlement negotiations. The HOA balked at first, unwilling to relinquish control. But as the legal costs mounted and public scrutiny intensified, cracks began to show in their armor. For the first time since the lawsuit began, the possibility of resolution loomed on the horizon. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, Emma felt a flicker of optimism. She had fought tirelessly to expose the truth and hold the HOA accountable. Now, with a creative solution on the table, she dared to dream of a day when Silver Ridge could heal, and perhaps even thrive because of her efforts. As the legal battle between Emma Carter and the HOA dragged on, the tension in Silver Ridge reached a fever pitch. The once quiet town was now a hotbed of gossip, speculation, and division. Residents who had lived side by side for years found themselves choosing sides, some standing firmly with Emma, while others defended the HOA's actions, or at least their intentions. Amidst the chaos, new revelations began to surface that would not only deepen the scandal, but also reshape the course of the lawsuit. One particularly explosive discovery came during depositions, where key figures involved in the resort's construction were called to testify under oath. Among them was a former contractor named Greg Miller, who had worked closely with the HOA during the early stages of the project. Greg wasn't just any contractor. He was one of the few people who knew the inner workings of the resort's development from the ground up, and he had grown increasingly disillusioned over time. When Greg took the stand, his testimony sent shockwaves through the courtroom and the community. He revealed that the HOA board members had secretly partnered with private investors to fund the resort, promising them lucrative long-term leases on portions of the property in exchange for kickbacks. These agreements, however, were never put in writing, at least not officially. Instead, they relied on verbal promises and informal handshakes, leaving no paper trail, or so they thought. Emma's legal team uncovered emails and voicemail recordings that painted a very different picture. In one email chain, an HOA board member casually mentioned splitting the profits with an unnamed investor after the resort became operational. Another recording captured a phone conversation discussing how certain sections of the property could be leased out for exclusive use by high-profile clients. These pieces of evidence proved beyond doubt that the HOA had acted not only illegally, but also unethically, prioritizing personal gain over the interests of the community. The fallout from Greg's testimony was immediate. Public opinion in Silver Ridge began to shift yet again. While many residents had initially viewed the resort as a violation of their rights, others started seeing it as an opportunity. Local businesses, struggling to stay afloat in recent years, welcomed the influx of tourists flocking to the area. Cafes, boutiques, and even the sleepy corner store saw increased foot traffic, boosting sales and creating jobs. Some neighbors argued that shutting down the resort entirely would be throwing away a golden chance for economic revival. This growing divide put pressure on Emma. Her closest allies, who had stood by her side since the beginning, began questioning whether pursuing the lawsuit was worth it. "What if we're fighting for the wrong thing?" asked Sarah, a longtime friend and fellow homeowner. "I mean, look at what the resort is doing for the town. Maybe we should focus on making sure everyone benefits instead of tearing it down." Emma listened patiently, understanding their concerns, but unwilling to compromise her principles entirely. She reminded them that the core issue wasn't the resort itself, it was the manner in which it had been built. Ignoring permits, breaking covenants, and misusing funds set a dangerous precedent. If the HOA got away with this, what would stop them from repeating similar offenses in the future? Still, she recognized the need for a middle ground. After weeks of deliberation with her lawyers, Emma proposed a bold counteroffer during settlement negotiations. Rather than demolishing the resort or allowing the HOA to continue operating it unchecked, why not turn it into a cooperative venture owned jointly by the community? Under her plan, the HOA would sign a 40-year land lease agreement, effectively handing over operational authority to a newly formed community trust. All profits generated by the resort would be reinvested directly into Silver Ridge, funding everything, from school programs and infrastructure improvements to environmental conservation efforts. The idea sparked heated debate both inside and outside the courtroom. Supporters hailed it as a brilliant solution, a way to hold the HOA accountable while ensuring the town reaped the benefits of the resort. Critics, however, accused Emma of backing down, claiming she was letting the HOA off the hook. Anonymous. Threats escalated, with ominous notes appearing on her doorstep warning her to abandon the case altogether. One message read simply, "You're ruining this town." Despite the backlash, Emma pressed on. Her proposal gained traction among residents who saw it as a pragmatic approach to a complex problem. Even some former opponents softened their stance, acknowledging that the compromise addressed both the legal violations and the potential economic upside. Behind closed doors, the HOA board members reluctantly agreed to consider the offer, realizing they had little choice. The mounting legal fees, negative publicity, and increasing public scrutiny were taking a toll on their credibility and their wallets. Negotiations stretched on for weeks, each session filled with tense exchanges and hard-fought compromises. At one point, talks nearly collapsed when the HOA refused to relinquish full control of the resort's finances. Emma's team pushed back, arguing that transparency was non-negotiable. Eventually, a breakthrough came when an independent auditor was brought in to oversee the transition process, ensuring accountability on both sides. By the time a tentative agreement was reached, the entire town seemed to exhale collectively. The HOA would transfer operational control of the resort to the community trust, governed by elected representatives from Silver Ridge. A 40-year land lease ensured stability while giving the HOA nominal ownership of the property. Most importantly, all revenue generated by the resort would flow directly back into the community, earmarked for projects voted on by residents. For Emma, the victory felt bittersweet. On one hand, she had achieved her goal of holding the HOA accountable and securing a fair outcome for the town. On the other hand, the fight had taken a heavy toll on her health, her relationships, and her peace of mind. Friends noticed how much older she looked, her once bright eyes now shadowed by exhaustion. Yet despite everything, she remained steadfast in her belief that the battle had been worth it. As news of the settlement spread, reactions varied across Silver Ridge. Some celebrated the resolution, hailing Emma as a hero who had saved the town from corruption. Others grumbled about the compromise, insisting that justice hadn't been fully served. But one thing was undeniable. The unauthorized resort had become a catalyst for change, forcing residents to confront uncomfortable truths about power, accountability, and the kind of community they wanted to build. For Emma, the next chapter loomed uncertain. She had poured every ounce of energy into this fight, and now, with the dust beginning to settle, she wondered what came next. Would the community truly come together to make the most of this second chance? Or would old divisions resurface, threatening to undo the fragile progress they had made? Only time would tell. But for now, Emma allowed herself a rare moment of quiet reflection, knowing she had done everything in her power to protect the place she loved. And so, as the sun set over the hills of Silver Ridge, casting a warm glow over the controversial resort, the town stood at a crossroads. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in months there was hope, a glimmer of possibility that perhaps, out of conflict, something stronger and more resilient could emerge. The turning point in Emma Carter's battle against the HOA came unexpectedly, not through a dramatic courtroom showdown, but through a quiet yet devastating revelation. As the lawsuit entered its final stages, tensions were running higher than ever. The HOA was desperate to salvage its reputation and its finances, while Emma's legal team worked tirelessly to ensure that justice would prevail. But it was a seemingly minor detail, uncovered almost by accident, that tipped the scales decisively in Emma's favor. It happened during a routine review of construction documents. One of Emma's lawyers, poring over blueprints and inspection reports, noticed inconsistencies in the structural plans for the resort. What appeared to be minor discrepancies at first glance turned out to be glaring red flags upon closer examination. Beams were thinner than required by building codes, foundations lacked proper reinforcements, and drainage systems had been hastily installed without regard for environmental impact. These weren't just oversights. They were deliberate shortcuts, taken to cut costs and expedite the project. To confirm their suspicions, Emma's team hired an independent engineering firm to conduct a thorough assessment of the resort. What they found was alarming. Structural flaws riddled nearly every aspect of the development, from the luxury cabins to the golf course clubhouse. In some areas, improper materials had been used, posing significant safety risks. For example, the swimming pool's retaining walls were constructed with substandard concrete, making them prone to collapse under pressure. Worse still, the spa's heating system violated fire safety regulations, creating a potential hazard for guests. When these findings were presented during settlement negotiations, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Up until this point, the HOA had maintained a defiant stance, refusing to budge on key issues like financial transparency and operational control. But faced with evidence of negligence so severe it could endanger lives, their confidence began to crumble. Board members exchanged nervous glances as Emma's lawyer laid out the implications. If word got out about the safety violations, the resort would face immediate closure, not by court order but by mandatory evacuation from local authorities. Tourists would flee, investors would pull out, and the HOA's dream of profiting from the venture would evaporate overnight. Realizing they had no choice but to negotiate in earnest, the HOA finally agreed to sit down and hammer out a deal. Over. The next several weeks, discussions grew more productive, though far from harmonious. Every concession was hard-fought, with both sides digging in their heels over critical details. Should the community trust have full autonomy, or should the HOA retain some supervisory role? How would profits be distributed, and who would oversee the allocation process? Would penalties be imposed retroactively for the misuse of funds? At one particularly contentious meeting, tempers flared when the topic of accountability arose. Emma insisted that those responsible for authorizing the illegal construction must step down from their positions within the HOA. This isn't just about fixing the problem, she argued passionately. It's about restoring trust. How can we move forward if the same people who broke the rules are still calling the shots? Her words resonated with many residents, especially after leaked emails revealed attempts by certain board members to cover up their involvement in the scandal. One email in particular stood out. A message sent late at night instructing staff to delete incriminating files before auditors arrived. When this evidence was made public, outrage swept through Silver Ridge. Even longtime supporters of the HOA began calling for resignations, recognizing that leadership changes were necessary for healing to begin. Finally, after months of grueling negotiations, a historic agreement was reached. Under the terms of the settlement, the HOA would sign a 40-year land lease, transferring operational authority of the resort to a newly established community trust. This trust would be governed by elected representatives chosen directly by the residents of Silver Ridge, ensuring democratic oversight. All revenue generated by the resort would flow into a communal fund, earmarked for projects benefiting the entire town. From renovating schools to expanding healthcare facilities, to restoring natural habitats damaged by the construction. Perhaps, most significantly, the settlement included provisions for reparations. The HOA was ordered to repay misappropriated reserve funds along with interest, to compensate for years of financial mismanagement. Additionally, strict guidelines were put in place to prevent similar abuses in the future, including regular audits, transparent decision-making processes, and mandatory resident approval for any major development projects. For Emma, the victory was monumental, but not without personal cost. The stress of the lawsuit had taken a visible toll on her health. Friends remarked how much older she looked, her once vibrant energy dulled by sleepless nights and constant worry. Yet, despite the exhaustion, there was a sense of fulfillment in her eyes. She had fought tirelessly for what she believed was right, and now, against all odds, she had succeeded. As news of the settlement spread, reactions across Silver Ridge were mixed. Some residents celebrated openly, hailing Emma as a hero who had saved the town from corruption. Others remained skeptical, questioning whether the compromise truly held the HOA accountable enough. Tensions lingered, particularly among those who felt their voices hadn't been adequately heard throughout the process. But even critics couldn't deny the significance of the outcome. For the first time in years, power had shifted away from a select few and into the hands of the broader community. Emma herself tried to stay out of the spotlight as much as possible. While she attended the inaugural meeting of the Community Trust to offer guidance, she largely stepped back, allowing others to take the lead. Instead, she focused on rebuilding her own life, spending long hours tending to her garden and reconnecting with friends she'd neglected during the lawsuit. Though she occasionally received messages of gratitude from neighbors, she brushed them off modestly, insisting she had only done what anyone else in her position would have done. Meanwhile, life in Silver Ridge began to change for the better. With the resort now operating under community ownership, profits poured back into the town, revitalizing local businesses and improving infrastructure. Schools received much-needed upgrades, including new science labs and expanded libraries. Parks were renovated, offering safer playgrounds and cleaner walking trails. Even the forest lands surrounding the resort benefited, thanks to conservation efforts funded by the trust. Tourism boomed, bringing visitors from neighboring towns and beyond. Families flocked to the resort for weekend getaways, drawn by its luxurious amenities and breathtaking views. Local restaurants thrived, hiring additional staff to meet the surge in demand. Artisans set up stalls at farmers' markets, selling handmade crafts and homemade goods. Slowly but surely, the economy of Silver Ridge transformed, lifting spirits and fostering a renewed sense of pride among residents. But perhaps the most profound change was less tangible, a shift in mindset. The fight over the resort had forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about inequality, transparency, and collective responsibility. Neighbors who had once barely spoken to each other now collaborated on community projects, united by a shared vision for the future. Meetings of the Community Trust became lively forums for discussion, where ideas flowed freely and decisions were made democratically. Looking back, Emma often reflected on how far they had come. What started as a single act of defiance, a retired attorney standing up to a corrupt HOA, had grown into something far greater. It wasn't just about winning a lawsuit. It was about reclaiming agency, empowering ordinary citizens, and proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, justice could prevail. And so, as the seasons changed and the hills of Silver Ridge turned golden with autumn leaves, the town embarked on a new chapter. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared entirely, but they were healing. Through perseverance, courage, and unity, the people of Silver Ridge had shown that adversity could be a catalyst for growth, and that sometimes the hardest battles yield the sweetest victories. The years following the resolution of the HOA scandal brought profound changes to Silver Ridge, transforming it in ways no one could have predicted. The once contentious resort, which had sparked so much division and debate, now stood as a symbol of resilience and renewal. It wasn't just a place where tourists came to relax. It was a testament to what a community could achieve when it worked together toward a common goal. Emma Carter, the woman at the heart of the fight, chose to step back from the limelight after the settlement was finalized. She had spent countless months pouring her energy into holding the HOA accountable, and though she felt proud of the outcome, she also knew it was time to let others take the reins. The newly formed Community Trust quickly became the driving force behind managing the resort, and its members approached their roles with enthusiasm and dedication. They organized monthly meetings open to all residents, ensuring transparency and inclusivity. Decisions about how profits would be allocated were made democratically, giving everyone in Silver Ridge a voice in shaping the future of their town. Under the Trust's leadership, the resort flourished. Its luxurious cabins, pristine golf course, and tranquil spa continued to attract visitors from across the region. But beyond its appeal as a vacation destination, the resort became a cornerstone of economic growth for Silver Ridge. Local businesses thrived as tourists streamed into town, eager to explore its charming streets and picturesque landscapes. Restaurants expanded their menus, hiring more staff to accommodate larger crowds. Artisans set up shop along Main Street, selling handmade jewelry, pottery, and paintings inspired by the natural beauty surrounding them. Even the sleepy corner store that had barely stayed afloat before the resort's opening transformed into a bustling hub, stocked with fresh produce, homemade jams, and locally crafted souvenirs. The influx of revenue allowed the community trust to fund projects that had long been delayed due to budget constraints. Schools received much-needed upgrades, including modernized classrooms, updated technology, and expanded extracurricular programs. For the first time in years, students had access to robotics clubs, art workshops, and music lessons, opportunities many families hadn't thought possible. Parks underwent extensive renovations, adding playground equipment, picnic areas, and walking trails that wound through the lush forests bordering the town. These improvements not only enhanced quality of life, but also encouraged outdoor activities, fostering a deeper connection between residents and the environment they cherished. One of the most significant achievements was the restoration of the protected green spaces that had initially sparked the controversy. When Emma first uncovered the illegal construction, part of the land designated as green space had been irreversibly altered to make way for the resort. However, thanks to funds generated by the trust, efforts were launched to rehabilitate nearby areas affected by deforestation and soil erosion. Volunteers planted thousands of trees, created wildlife sanctuaries, and built observation decks where visitors could enjoy panoramic views without disturbing the ecosystem. Over time, these initiatives helped restore balance to the landscape, earning Silver Ridge recognition as an eco-friendly destination committed to sustainability. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation occurred within the community itself. The battle over the resort had exposed deep divisions, pitting neighbor against neighbor and testing the bonds of trust that held Silver Ridge together. Yet, in the aftermath, something unexpected happened. People began talking to each other again. Conversations that had once been heated and confrontational gave way to collaborative discussions about shared goals and aspirations. Neighbors who had avoided each other during the lawsuit started working side by side on community projects, rediscovering the value of cooperation and mutual respect. This spirit of unity extended beyond practical matters. Social events, once rare, became regular occurrences. Annual festivals celebrating local culture drew record attendance, featuring live music, food trucks, and craft fairs. Community gardens sprang up in vacant lots, providing fresh produce while bringing people together to tend the soil and share stories. Even simple acts of kindness like lending tools, offering rides, or organizing potluck dinners became more common, reminding everyone of the power of small gestures to bridge divides. For Emma, watching these changes unfold filled her with quiet satisfaction, though she rarely attended public gatherings, preferring instead to spend her days tending to her garden or reading on her porch. She couldn't help but smile whenever she saw evidence of the progress they had made. Friends often teased her, calling her the hero of Silver Ridge, but she always brushed off the praise. "I didn't do this alone," she would say. "It was all of us, working together, standing up for what's right." Still, there were moments when Emma reflected on the personal cost of the fight. The lawsuit had consumed nearly 2 years of her life, leaving little room for anything else. Relationships she had cherished had frayed under the strain of constant conflict, and her own health had suffered from sleepless nights and relentless stress. Yet, despite everything, she never regretted taking a stand. In fact, looking back, she realized the experience had given her something invaluable, a renewed sense of purpose. In interviews conducted years later, journalists often asked Emma what advice she would give to others facing similar challenges. Her response was always the same: don't give up. Even when it feels like the odds are stacked against you, keep pushing forward. You might not win every battle, but if you stay true to your values and surround yourself with good people, you can create change. By the time the 40-year land lease agreement entered its second decade, Silver Ridge bore little resemblance to the town it had been before the resort scandal. Once known primarily for its quiet charm, it had evolved into a vibrant, thriving community respected for its commitment to fairness, sustainability, and innovation. Residents took pride in knowing they had played a role in shaping its destiny, a legacy born out of adversity, but sustained by unity. As for Emma, she continued living her life simply, content in the knowledge that she had made a difference. On sunny afternoons, she could often be found sitting on her porch, sipping tea and watching children play in the park across the street. Sometimes passers-by would stop to thank her for everything she had done. Others merely nodded in acknowledgement, their smiles conveying gratitude words couldn't express. And though Emma seldom spoke of the past, those who knew her understood that the scars of the fight still lingered, not as wounds, but as reminders of her strength. In the end, the story of Silver Ridge served as a powerful reminder of the impact one person could have when armed with determination and integrity. It showed that even in the face of overwhelming opposition, ordinary individuals could rise to extraordinary heights. More than anything, it proved that justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about building something better, something stronger, something capable of enduring long after the battles had ended. And so, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, Silver Ridge stood as a beacon of hope, a testament to the resilience of its people and the enduring power of community.